Okay, so hello everyone. First, maybe I'll introduce myself. I'm Agnieszka Basta, and I'm the author of the blog teachyourbaby.pl, where I share my experience with multilingual raising of my two daughters with the Doman method and with some elements of other methods like Shichida or Heguru. And this is Spencer Doman, Glenna Doman's grandson. And I think he will tell more details about himself. So can you introduce yourself and tell us about your family? And I've heard that your family is quite big. How many siblings do you have? And just share whatever you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. So I guess kind of just telling the story from the beginning. So my grandfather, Glenna Doman, I'm sure most of the people watching this know him. That's probably why they're interested in this interview. But my grandfather, Glenna Doman, was a physical therapist, and he began his work with patients who had brain injury. And he basically discovered the phenomenon, which is known as neuroplasticity, before it was famous, and realized that brain development and brain growth is something that can be impacted by the stimulation that we give to children and the activities that we engage in. And so he realized pretty quickly on, this is back in the 1960s, that many of the same methods that he was using to help brain development for people who had brain damage, that if he used those same programs with neurotypical children, that they could also benefit from them. And so actually he's more famous for his work in early child development, his early reading program, his early math program, but that's actually not what he started doing first. And so, his most famous book is How to Teach Your Baby to Read, which is all about teaching tiny children how to read. And so I guess the reason why I'm here today, first of all, I was raised on the programs that were created by my grandfather. So my parents, Douglas and Rosalind, used the programs with me and my two brothers and my sister. And so today I'm kind of happy to do this interview because I've never been interviewed just about my experience as a child growing up on the program. It's something I like to talk about, but because I primarily teach parents what to do with their children, I don't get to talk about it very much. And so what I do now is I'm essentially a parent coach. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Doman International, which is an organization which gives holistic solutions to parents of children with special needs. So we teach them cognitive development activities, physical development activities, nutrition, many different programs to help enhance brain development. And I'm also a co-founder for Doman Learning, which is a company that creates materials so that parents can utilize the Doman method at home in as efficient a way as possible, basically, for busy parents to teach their kids. And so, that's kind of the very quick version of the story.
Yeah. Thank you. Like you said, it's a bit different interview that you've had so far because all about your experience as a child, as an adult who was raised with the Doman method. And the first question is, did you live near the institute? I know your parents worked there, or maybe they even met there. Am I right?
That's all correct. Yeah. So my parents met one another doing this work in the early 1970s. So they basically fell in love working together. And I think that the fact that they both have this kind of shared vision and mission in the world, I think was a big part of that. And so, I was kind of born into this very unique situation where, not only did my parents use the program with my siblings and I, but also, the other families around me were utilizing the programs with their children as well. So, so I was kind of born immersed into this situation. If you kind of saw me as a child, at times my parents were doing the program with me. I might have been outside running and playing, but I was also spending a lot of time in the clinic where my parents worked. And we actually lived on the campus. So I was like playing with the brain injured children there. So I had this like very interesting experience where I was kind of surrounded by the Doman philosophy, both with children with special needs and with well children. And that, yeah, it definitely had a huge impact on the way I see the world.
Did you experience all Doman programs the same as brain injured kids? I mean,
yes.
The intellectual program,
yes.
reading, math, bits, everything.
Yeah, so basically everything that you read in the Doman books, everything that my grandfather ever wrote about, my parents did with me. And it makes sense, right? They were passionate about the programs, and so they wanted to use them with their own children. And then on top of that, also, I was, because I was always there with my parents, it was also very common that when they were teaching a parent of a brain injured child, that I might be there to help demonstrate to the family what to do. So if they wanted to show, this is what you do for patterning or crawling and creeping, because we have, many different programs that we use with brain injured children that we don't use with well children. So I was very often kind of like a demonstration kid for those things.
Okay, I see.
But yes, everything, and I always tell that to parents, I say everything that I teach parents to do with their kids, I experienced as a child.
Everything together with those masking, I think.
Everything.
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 Yeah. Not, I guess it wasn't your routine, but just, just.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that I necessarily did. Of course, the programs that are used for brain injured children, I wasn't doing regularly as a part of my life. But I did have the opportunity, interestingly, the family who lived next door to me, one of their children was my closest friend, and she had pretty severe learning difficulties, and she wasn't able to read up until the age of like 9 or 10. And so she was doing the program for brain injured children. And so I did the program with her. So I was doing, very, big quantities of crawling and creeping, for example, with her, like to give her company on the program. So yeah, I even, and also my sister as well, received a more intense program. I think we'll probably discuss that at some point today.
Yeah.
And so I got to be there with my sister as well when doing the program.
Next question was actually, were all the children in your family raised with the Doman method? So everybody, no matter if who's injured or healthy. Okay. How did your parents encourage you to do the program? Or maybe there was never any need for extra encouragement?
Well, I think first of all, when something is a way of life, when it's kind of built into the values and the fabric of a family, I don't think a ton of encouragement is necessarily needed, because it's just like, in our family, this is the way we do things. One of the most common questions that I get is something like, how was your upbringing? Like, how did your upbringing change the person that you are today? And of course, I understand why parents would be interested in that answer, but of course, it's very difficult for me to answer that question, because it's like, how would I know what my life would be like in a parallel universe where I had a different upbringing? But answering your question, so the program was just a way of life. And my parents, I think, were very good coaches. So I don't want to make it sound like it was always easy. Certain parts of the program should be easy, right? The cognitive parts of the program, things like reading, the encyclopedic knowledge program, math, those really should be fun and easy. And if they're not, then it means that there's a dynamic which is off. But I always remember those being fun. Sometimes the physical programs, because they require physical exertion can be a little bit more difficult. And I do remember at times as a kid being like, I don't want to do this. And my parents had to kind of coach me through the process. And coaching is not an easy thing. It requires both patience, but also a kind of tough love. I don't know if you know, non-English, you know, native English speakers know the phrase tough love, but it's like, you know, when you love someone, but you have to.
I understand it, but
you understand the idea.
I will use it maybe just for creeping and crawling if my child needs it, but for other things, not really.
Yeah.
I think it's
exactly.
Especially with brain injured kids.
Yeah, exactly. So
but
sometimes
it's so important.
Yeah, and I do think sometimes parents do need to be like, I love you, but I know what's best for you, and so we've got to do this. You know, sometimes kids do need challenge in their lives and in their childhood, and by the way, sometimes when they overcome those challenges, it makes them much stronger people. But yeah, there were times, but in that sense, I don't think my childhood was any easier or more difficult than other children. I think it was pretty average in that sense.
Did you crawl and creep as a baby, or maybe you had to do it later? I already know you did it, but just to keep company, but well.
Yeah. So keep in mind, my parents are not just Doman method coaches. They're both trained as physical Doman method coaches. And so absolutely, I mean, the floor was a way of life in our family. You know, we were crawling, creeping as babies. And certainly when we got older, between the ages of 4 and 6, we were doing crawling and creeping, you know, to continue, you know, our neurological development. And not all children develop the same, and some children have more neurological issues than others. So, for example, there were 4 kids in my family, but for 2 of us, we were kind of the fortunate ones in the sense that reading came very easily to us, right? So I was kind of a lucky one. I think by the age of 3, I was reading very, very well. But for one of my brothers and my sister, they had, you know, kind of incidents that affected their brain development. And so my parents did even more crawling and creeping with them to help their brain development so that they could read easier, learn easier. But yes, all of us did it.
Yeah, it's actually a bit of another question. Did any of your family members suffer a brain injury? So now I know, and we all know that yes. And if yes, how did you help with their treatment? Was your program somehow compromised because of that?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was compromised. I'd say the program was enhanced because in the sense when you have a child with brain injury, and they need a more intense program, actually the brothers and sisters can have a lot of wonderful benefits from that experience because, you know, they are kind of reaping the neurological rewards from the program, which is actually designed for their brothers and sisters. And so by the way, this is not my experience as a child, it's more my experience as a staff at Doman International. But we often find that the brothers and sisters of our children with brain injury are some of the most, you know, intelligent, physically fit, socially wonderful kids we ever meet. They're just those kind of like capable, confident, wonderful individuals, but it's because they've reaped the rewards of the program with their siblings. So yeah, definitely. I did a lot of program with my sister Morgan. She, at a young age, you know, in the first, I think it was when she was 2 or 3 months old, she got something called the whooping cough, which is a very ugly cough that honestly is not contracted very often in the early years of life anymore. It used to be a much more common disease, but unfortunately she got it in the first months of life. And my parents feel very strongly that that is sometimes even a life-threatening illness for children because it really impacts their breathing. And so my parents very much feel that that incident affected her brain development because it hurt her breathing, and because it hurt her breathing, it probably reduced the oxygen delivery to her brain. And so my parents, doing a very intensive program with all of us, noticed, I think I'd have to ask my parents exactly when they noticed a developmental issue, but I think by 5 or 6 years of age, it was very clear because, for example, I had learned how to read at a very young age. And so here they have a daughter and they're doing just as much work with her as they did with me, but she's not able to retain any of the information that she was learning. And I even remember when she was 8 or 9 years of age, I remember my mom teaching her something, and the next day it was like no memory of what she had been taught. Like absolutely no memory, like it's like it never even happened. And that was
have students like this, unfortunately, because I'm a teacher. I have students.
Yeah. And it's very upsetting. And unfortunately, most children that grow up with this issue, they think that they're stupid, right? They have this idea of like, oh, the other kids can do it, I can't, I'm stupid. And very often those children are very hard workers. Now, sometimes they will give up after some time when they realize they just can't learn like other children, which is kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. They think it's their fault when it's not their fault at all. But my parents, basically from the age of 6 until my sister was 9 or 10, they did a very intensive program with her. Every part of the program that we do for brain injured kids, they did with her. And by 10 years of age, she was reading above age level. Her problem was essentially completely gone. And she went on to get a master's degree in nonprofit management. So the issues did not affect her in the long run, but I think that's really because of all of my parents' effort. And she says that as well.
How can you describe the difference between treating a well child and a brain injured child? You've already said that your sister was in a really, really intensive program. What was the difference between her program and maybe yours? I know that you took part in everything, but maybe there was something that was for you was not really necessary.
Yeah, well, actually, I would say probably it's not so much of course, there's a difference between what she did and what I did as a child. But I think it's actually more about parent mindset, in the sense that when you've got a well neurotypical child, if you take a day off, right? If you decide, well, today we won't do the program, we'll just kind of sit around and relax. No one gets hurt by that, right? But I think for a parent with a kid with brain injury, lost time is something much more serious. And I think because they see that, when they lose days or weeks or months, they start to see the gap between their child and other children widening. And so I think it's more actually about the intensity and the consistency from the standpoint of the parents. And of course that means it means harder work on the parents' part, and more persistence.
Can you share any ways of encouraging to creep and crawl that your parents used?
Yeah, sure. So method number 1 was reading to me. So we would do crawling and creeping, and mom or dad would kind of walk around next to us or behind us and read a book. And so that, whenever you're trying to urge your child to do physical activity, the best thing to do is to take your child's mind off the activity. So keeping their mind on something else is the best way to do it. So, so reading books, telling funny stories is always a good one. For crawling and creeping specifically, my parents would, this is like a very simple thing, but kids love it. They would stand in front of us as we crawled and crept, and they'd put their legs out like this. And we would have to crawl or creep underneath their legs. but their legs would close. So the whole goal was you have to crawl underneath before their legs shut on you, like a gate closing on you. You know, and for kids, it's like an exciting thing, like, oh no, my mom or dad will catch me with their legs, you know. But those kind of small games, you know, definitely, you know, sometimes doing something with a ball where, you know, you would creep, you know, maybe you would try to score a goal. So you'd have to hit the ball between, you know, under a chair, something like that. So kids, you know, often with just simple little games can be entertained. And that I think that for parents is the most important thing. How do I get my child's mind off of this activity? Don't talk about the activity itself. You know, don't say to your child, you know, oh, I know this is tough work. It's so hard, because then it's just going to kind of feed into some negative thoughts that they're having. You know, they'll start to lose energy.
Thank you. This is very useful advice, because it seems to me that this crawling and creeping is the most difficult part of the program. So for older kids, just to encourage that. Because they don't want.
Absolutely.
Did you attend any school, or maybe you were homeschooled?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So up until the age of 6, you know, I was raised, you know, I was at home. My mom was doing a program with me. What my parents did, which I thought was kind of smart, one day a week, my dad actually stayed home from work and my mom would go to work. So essentially 4 weekdays, my mom was home with us. And then one day, we called it Dad's Day. My dad stayed home with us and did the program. And I can talk more about that if you want to, but that's a kind of different topic. But I'm sorry, what was your first question? I was getting lost in thought.
You know, if you attended any school or school. So, next is, what are your school experiences? Was it traditional, unusual? If unusual, maybe you can share some interesting memories.
Well, look, my whole schooling experience was incredibly unusual, because so at 6 years of age, I went to the Evan Thomas Institute, which is a small private school in Philadelphia, which was kind of built around my grandfather's programs and utilized with, you know, it's for local children in the Philadelphia area. And so, you know, I went there from the age of 6 until the age of 14. So I was being taught there with, you know, my grandfather's teaching methods. I learned Suzuki violin, which, you know, is Shinichi Suzuki is a Japanese man who created a whole way of instructing tiny children how to play the violin. We did triathlons, you know, so we did long distance running races. We learned gymnastics. So it was definitely a unique childhood. I did Shakespeare plays. And so every year the school would do a Shakespeare play. And, you know, for anyone who knows English, I mean, Shakespeare is not only considered the greatest writer in the English language, but also it's highly sophisticated. It's what, 500-600 years old. And so that was a great experience growing up. And then the school ended at the age of 14. So then what I did next, and this was the same for me and all of my siblings. At the age of 14, we went for 1 year of school abroad. So I went to Mexico for a year to learn Spanish, learn the culture. I lived with a family there. All of my brothers and I went to Mexico. My sister went to Italy. And I think my parents felt that was important to give us maybe some opportunity to kind of grow, experience a different culture. Really important because he had that opportunity when he was young. He spent, I think, about a year in Colombia. And so he wanted us to have that same opportunity. And then, so we did that for 1 year. And then when we came back at the age of 15, we attended university. Now, I know I'm saying all of us did this, but my parents always gave us the option. So we could go to university at the age of 15, or we could do the typical American thing, which is to go to high school. My oldest brother and my sister Morgan and I decided to go directly to university. My youngest brother decided to go to high school, but he only did that for a year, and then he decided, oh, I'd rather just go to university. It's like not challenging enough, and so he went to university. So so at the age of 15, I went to university. I know that that sounds very impressive. I don't consider it that remarkable, honestly, because I consider it my parents' achievement, not mine. And then after, so I guess starting at university, it was more typical. I got my bachelor's degree, and then after that, my master's in early childhood education. But yeah, that would, usually in the US, kids go to university at 18 or 19 years of age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me it sounds very impressive. So you didn't experience traditional education, because university, I don't know, but it's something I think better than primary school or high school. I think Doman kids may be bored in primary school.
I think, so I think going to university was good for me because, first of all, maybe more academic challenge, but also there was more freedom. At least in American university, we have a lot of freedom about choosing what we want.
Poland too. Yeah. I loved going to
yeah.
university. School before.
Yeah. I don't think I missed very much. Everyone's like, oh, you didn't miss very much. So
yeah, I'm a teacher. I'm saying that. Did you ever felt out of place when meeting your peers? I mean, in your childhood, because, for example, well, I have the impression that my 4-year-old daughter can already read in several languages, prefers older children to play with. I really can't imagine her playing just with her peers. And what about you? What did you feel as a child?
I don't remember feeling out of place. I don't remember that. And by the way, this is a question that I get a lot. I don't remember having this sense.
Yeah, to this St. Thomas Institute, and all kids were like you, I guess.
Yes, but I did. But the thing is, I did have a lot of interactions with other kids through, certain groups that I was a part of, like sport teams, clubs, things like that. And no, I don't remember having that feeling of being out of place. I think I obviously realized early on that maybe there are certain things that I could speak about with other Doman kids that maybe wouldn't be as interesting to other kids just because they hadn't been exposed to it before. But no, I think I don't think I felt out of place.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't feel strange because, for example, you could read and the others not, something like that, and no, nothing.
No.
Yeah.
No. I do have to say that I the first time I really noticed a big difference between me and other people was actually when I went to university when I was 15, because I realized, I'll just never forget it. I was in my first math course, and it was quite easy for me. And I was, in my class, there were many people who were in their 20s and even in their 30s, like going back to university, and they were struggling. And I tutored them, like I was helping them. And I really realized at that point, wow, like I really, I hit the lottery, like I hit the jackpot growing up on the program. But I have to say that
you felt happy about it, and not you felt happy about it, not really confused.
No, I didn't feel confused, but I felt compassion toward others, you know, in the sense like, I really felt badly that they were really struggling to grasp something that I feel that they didn't have to struggle for, but it's just because they just weren't taught in the right way, they were struggling. And I felt really, really badly for them. And some of them, by the way, were harder workers than me. You know, I remember there were like women in my class who were like single mothers, like going back to university, trying to get their degree. They had kids, you know, and they, you know, I looked at them and I was like, oh, you know, I wish this was easy for you because you deserve that. So I feel in many ways it gave me some compassion toward others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I was just wondering how my daughter will feel when she discovers that, for example, it's not so natural that everybody speaks so many languages.
Yeah.
I think that it's like normal that she can do something.
Yeah. Do you think she notices that there's a difference between her and other kids?
I think not yet, because we meet kids who are raised also in a special way, maybe not on the Doman method, but for example, for German, we have a meeting with a mom and her son, and she speaks German to him only. So we can't really speak much German. I think Maya can speak more than me, but we just spent all 3 hours or 4 hours in German somehow communicating. Yeah. So she thinks it's normal. Yeah. And I sometimes wonder why, what is she thinking? Because the playgrounds, she's like that. She doesn't start talking to other kids first. Like she doesn't know which language should she use, because she doesn't. I think she doesn't realize fully that we live in Poland and everybody speaks Poland, even those kids that we meet for other languages. But
that's so funny. That's so funny. Yeah, but you know, that's the nice thing about kids. They don't have to speak the same language to play with one another. So yeah. I'm sure she'll figure it out.
They have crazy moms. They can somehow communicate not knowing the language, because we assume no English, no Polish. So I have to speak German suddenly. That I'm learning, so it's okay. Next question: how would you rate, only from the Doman method perspective, the influence of a traditional education, so preschool, kindergarten, school, on kids that have been taught in the right brain way, assuming that parent has been working with a child since birth, and approximately at the age of 3, a child is exposed to other education, like sent to preschool?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, it's like, how do I consider traditional education? Like, how would I rate traditional education for children raised on this program?
It can be also like that. Or how does this early training up to the age of 3 influence the traditional education maybe later on?
Well, I mean, I think from the child's standpoint, it certainly makes schooling easier. So, you know, from the child's perspective, I think it definitely paves an easier path forward. And, you know, so I think that's a positive thing for a child, because I think when children are successful at things, it motivates them to keep working for them. I think it's very bad for a child when they go to school for the first time, and if they find math difficult or reading difficult, they start to learn that, oh, these are very difficult things, I'm not good at them. So they start to make assumptions about themselves as people, because children will always navigate toward what they're good at. That is just a fact of most kids. Sure, some children might be so self-dedicated, self-motivated, they will work at things, but most children will, and by the way, most humans, we'd like to gravitate toward what we're good at. So I think when you send a kid to school and they're kind of naturally good at everything, they're gonna like everything. And so I think that's one of the greatest gifts of the program for me. I really always loved learning. I never had this idea that I wasn't good at something, you know, like I always thought like, oh, I can do that. And because I felt things came easily to me. I wasn't hesitant to try something new either. So I think from the child's perspective, it's a very good thing. If I'm talking just about traditional education, I think there are a lot of problems with tradition, like, a lot of the school system. I think a lot of preschools and kindergartens have absolutely no idea how intelligent tiny children are. They don't know how to teach children in the best possible way. And for that reason, from an academic standpoint, I don't know how much they're really achieving. And then from a primary school situation on, I kind of feel that the schooling system depends on the kid, in the sense that, like, if you send a child to school and they learn pretty easily, and they're the kind of child who's happy to sit in a chair for prolonged periods of time and learn, they'll be fine and they'll do well. But if you've got a child who's a little bit more active, who wants to work with their hands, a child who might have learning difficulties, for whatever reason, makes it more difficult for them to kind of fit the perfect school model, then I think traditional education becomes a lot more problematic. And so I feel for those, I would call them maybe 40% of children. I think it's more than people realize. Schooling becomes a very unhappy experience, because it's just like year after year of hoping, okay, when am I going to be done with this? Because learning isn't easy, or they just hate sitting in one place for hours at a time. They don't enjoy the subjects that they're learning. Reading is tough for them. Math is tough, whatever. And I think for those kids, I think our school system is terrible.
Do you know any Doman kids who go to school and are like that they sit and listen to something that they already know?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So
because it's like that. Listening
well,
about
most Doman kids that I know went to regular school. So I do like to tell that to people, because a lot of people think my experience being raised on the program is the normal experience. Actually, most Doman kids, either sometimes parents will homeschool them, or sometimes parents will send them to school, depending on the family's situation and what options they have. But look, I think for most Doman kids, because academically and intellectually they've gotten a lot of stimulation, they tend to be those kids that go into school and find it easy. And so yes, maybe school isn't as stimulating for those children as it should be, but they tend to be successful in school, and because they're successful in it, they tend to kind of enjoy it. I think a lot of parents are afraid, like, oh, if I do the Doman program with my child, my kid will go to school and they'll be so bored and hate school. And look, yes, is it possible that your child will hate school? Of course. But keep in mind, many children hate school. So like Doman program or not. And actually, in my experience, a kid who loves to learn actually will do better in school. Doman kids don't tend to be so closed-minded. They actually tend to be intellectually curious. So even if they're in school and they've kind of learned about something before, a lot of them are like, okay, like I can learn this again, or we can talk about this again.
Okay. Good to know this. How long were you on the Doman method as a child? And how long would you recommend doing the Doman method with a well child and a brain-injured one? I'm asking because parents usually stop when the child starts to read. I haven't stopped. But, I just stopped creating new cards. We are doing something else. And what about your experience?
Okay. So I think this is actually a difficult question for me to answer, because...
Did they start, your parents at birth?
They started at birth. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, starting. Yeah, it's like, from the moment we came out, like my parents were going. So, and by the way, that's, it's like my nephew was born in February, and like the moment he comes out, I'm doing like the Babinski reflex with him. I'm like checking all these different things because it's like a way of life. Like it's the way you think, Like I think for most parents, in the world, they check their children have 10 fingers and 10 toes, when the baby is born to make sure the child is okay. And, we do the light reflex and Babinski reflex and startle reflex. And, so it's like a different kind of way. But I think the reason why I said it's a difficult question to answer, even when we got into school, into primary school, a lot of like Doman method activities, like single words, for example. My mom, for example, if we were learning words, she would write the kind of vocabulary words that we were learning in school on small cards, even when we were like 8, 10, 12 years old. So we were still learning vocabulary with that same methodology, just presented in a more sophisticated way for us as children. So you can definitely continue on. I don't think you should just like get your child reading and then stop. And
yeah, but a lot of parents do that because maybe their goal is
well, by the way, even if your child learns how to read independently, that's just step one, in my opinion, because many children learn how to read independently, but they're not fast readers. And, they still will like learn, they'll still kind of read kind of word by word or syllable by syllable. And so even if your child learns how to read independently, you shouldn't stop the reading program. You should continue to show single words because it will speed their reading. And when your child reads quickly, the comprehension will improve. So yeah, that's very important.
Speaking of reading, when did you start reading? 3 years.
When did I start reading?
You were 3 years old, yes?
Well, I started reading.
Maybe independent.
No way of saying.
Maybe first, when did you start reading, and then when was it independent?
Sure. Well, I mean, so if we're being technical, I started reading when I was a baby.
Maybe showing off a little so that your parents were quite sure that it's like the start.
Well, yeah, I mean, because even with infants, when you're showing them single words, you can still, if you want to play games with them where you're like holding up words and you're like, oh, okay, where's the word, learning, you can still do those kind of activities with them. So, I think even when we were babies, my parents once in a while were checking. I mean, even with my nephew, who's now 6 months old, my mom was pulling out words and he's showing at 6 months of age that he can differentiate the words, So yeah, that's my technical answer. If we're talking about reading in terms of reading like homemade books, for example, where it was 3 years old.
Years old, And what was your first book that was not homemade, but real bought book that you read?
That's funny.
Do you remember?
The first books I remember reading were a series of books called the Hardy Boys. Hardy is a name, like Hardy, and they're like detective books for kids. So there's like Scooby-Doo, there's like a case and they're like detectives and they're trying to find out who did it. They're very old books. They're from like the 1960s, but my parents had a set. And so those are the first books I remember reading, like really like page turning all by myself.
How did you feel about your reading? Because I'm asking, was it a bit like guessing or something? Because my husband asked my daughter once, "Are you reading or guessing?" And she told him guessing.
Okay.
So, and from the mistake she made when she really started reading aloud and showing off, it wasn't like guessing, and I don't know if it's still like that.
My difficulty, and maybe this is why I'm not an interesting person to interview about my childhood. I don't remember learning how to read. You know, that's the crazy thing.
Yeah, she doesn't remember either. She's 4 years old and she doesn't remember those red cards and everything.
No, I mean, I remember watching my younger brothers and sisters learning how to read, but I don't remember doing it myself. And so, you know, it's funny because sometimes people will say to me, oh, remember when you were 5 or 6 and you had to learn how to read and you were learning how to, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I never remember any of that. You know, I don't remember learning math because it happened when I was an infant. So, you know, by the time I was like, I guess old enough to really formulate detailed memories, I could do all those things already.
Okay. But how do you remember your first book, maybe? Was it like guessing or I don't know, what do you remember your feelings? Because, you know, normally kids struggle, you know, just letter by letter and combining. This is like a normal way of...
I never remember that. I can honestly say I never remember struggling.
Okay.
Sorry. I maybe my brothers and sister would have a different memory.
Okay, because I'm really curious about this guessing, not reading, but guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you read a lot of books now, maybe as an adult?
It depends what you consider a lot of books. I would not consider myself actually as much of a reader as many of the other people in my life. My brothers and sisters, I actually probably read more than me. I probably average 1 or 2 books a month. So it depends on what you consider to be a lot. But I think a lot of that is because of the amount of time I put into my work. So often my reading time is like evenings and then I fall asleep. So reading, you know, so I don't read books as quickly as I would like to. Yeah.
Did your mom work after you and all your... you've already answered it. She worked just 1 day, yeah? Something like that?
She worked 1 day a week while we were tiny children. And then I think once my youngest brother was 6 years of age and was going to school, at that point she went back to work full time. But yes, up until that time, it was 1 day a week.
And I know both your parents were involved in the Doman method, both in preparing materials and everything. Or
yes, yes. Although I would say that they had their kind of roles. So my dad was very much involved in the physical program. So even when he was working, we did like aerobic running, for example, when, you know, as we got older. And so he would take us out running in the morning. So very often he was doing those physical programs. My mom was doing more the intellectual programs. That seemed to be kind of like their division of, you know, and some parents do that. They divide up the jobs.
I have the impression not many parents. My group, there are moms, and some of them complain to me that the fathers are not really supportive, and you know, it's good when they just ignore.
Dads need to be more involved.
Yeah.
And by the way, if people want, I have a free webinar that I've done, which is it's about for dads specifically. It's called it's called 5 things dads can do to supercharge their Doman program.
I think I shared it once, but it was quite a long time ago. So maybe I can share it.
Yeah, it's
now there
probably a year ago.
more people in my group and
yeah.
I'll find it. I remember it.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for parents to have a successful Doman program and work? Does it make any difference if we speak about well or brain injured children?
The second part is, does it make a difference?
Does it make any difference? So is it possible at all to work and
yeah. So look, absolutely it's possible to do a program with parents working. Obviously it can't be as big a program, that's for sure. So it has to be adapted around the schedule. But that being said, I always urge working parents to still do the program. even if that means just doing a little bit consistently, because I really feel that even a little bit of the program is very beneficial for a child, from not just their development standpoint, but just, about bringing something beautiful into the parent-child relationship, about, learning together. And of course, on weekends, for example, you'll have more time together and you can do more of the program. So yeah, I guess my quick answer would be, the more time you can have as a parent with your child, the better. But for some parents, that's just not an option. And if it's not an option, then just do what you can do.
I'm a working mom. I'm lucky to be on maternity leave now and before on sick leave and so on. But, I with my older daughter, I worked for almost 2 years. So.
Mm-hmm.
What is your earliest memory of Glenna Domana?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow. It's hard for me to say exactly like what the earliest memory was, but I can kind of just talk about my memories of him as a person. So obviously my first memories of him are as a very loving grandfather. And, he was, if I'm just talking about him from a personal standpoint, he was very loving and gentle and generous with his grandchildren. And so I grew up with that kind of loving grandfather, but he was always willing to talk about very deep things with us as children. He had this like immense respect for tiny kids. He really respected the intelligence of tiny children. And, I remember, one of the biggest impressions, most meaningful events in my grandfather's life was his war experiences. And, during the Second World War. And I remember as a tiny child, I think especially as a boy, I was very interested in that. And so I would talk to him, I would ask him questions about it. And he was very open to talking about it with me, which obviously is not like many people who have been through a very difficult and traumatic experience like he went through. He went through maybe 5 or 6 different European countries during his experience in the war. And so he was very open, and he made it very clear that he loved us very much, but he also had high expectations for us. So like, for example, if I went to him and I went, "Grandpa, I made this achievement, right? I did something good in school. I did this." He would always say the same thing. He would say, "I'm very proud of you, but I'm not surprised." And so I always took that as a big compliment from him. He was very proud of me, but he knew I had capabilities. And I always felt that was a kind of very positive way of saying, "You're good, but keep going. I expect high things from you." And I felt that was like very positive.
I like that.
Yeah.
What do you excel at? Because we are talking about education and so on, and you said you didn't feel any problems with anything. So it seems that you were good at everything, but maybe there is something, I don't know, maybe math, or maybe, I don't know, what?
Something that I wasn't good at? Is that what you're asking?
Something that you were the best at.
Oh, that I was the best at? Mm-hmm. Oh. I feel like these questions are a trap, because if I say like, "Oh, I'm the best at something," people go, "Oh, he's," I was...
What comes really, really easily to you? I don't know. Or maybe what came in the past when you think about your education. Or maybe everything. I don't know.
Math. Yeah, I would say math. Yeah, math and languages, I would say, probably came to me very easily.
And I have a question.
In terms of things that, now just to counter it, things that were difficult for me. I never got good at baseball. which is a popular sport here in America. But afterwards I realized that's because I didn't have a good coach. And so, he was the kind of person who kind of like picked his favorite players and gave all the attention to his favorite players. And he didn't know how to like take a student who wasn't as good and coach them along. So, but that's why I learned the importance of kids feeling successful, because when basically I went into baseball, the first year I was quite good when I was 8 and I had a good coach. But then when I went to the 9-year-olds, it was more difficult for me, and he didn't help me through the process. And so because it was difficult, I said, I don't like baseball anymore. So I found another sport. I went and played soccer, and that was a great sport, and I did fine. But I learned early on that, if kids don't feel successful in something, they'll quickly move on to something else.
What about your math skills? How do you perceive quantities, numbers from an adult perspective? This is a question from somebody.
I love this question. And this is a very nice phrasing of the question, because the person who asked this question, what they really want to know is if I see a dot card, if I can still recognize the dots on the card. That's their nice way of asking this question. I get this question a lot. So I honestly, at this point, I don't know if I perceive quantity much different from anyone else. Okay. And this is actually, this is one of my biggest interests professionally, because when I was a baby, I was able to recognize quantities instantaneously. So for example, if my mom held up 89 dots and 91 and asked me, Spencer, where's 89? I could spot the quantity 89. And so sometime along the way, I lost that ability. And I don't know why. And it seems like a lot of children that grow up on the program, they lose this quantity recognition ability. I think, if you ask me for my opinion why, I think it's because they just have so much exposure to the numerical symbols, and because they don't use this ability in daily life after you use the quantity cards, that they kind of like eventually just lose this ability. I've met a few parents that continue doing it with 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and the children retain the ability, which is why I think maybe it has to do with that. But I also say to parents, I don't know if it's so valuable for me as a adult to perceive quantities. How often in my life do I need to perceive, look at 67 things and know that's 67? So what I always say is I think that the early teaching of quantity is very, very important for later math success. And by the way, there's a lot of research that backs this up. The ability to comprehend quantity is called innate number sense. Innate number sense. It's the ability to have this kind of sense of numbers. And they've shown that, for example, that children by the age of 9 who have weak number sense tend to do much worse in math than children who are strong in it. And they've also shown in research that even children who don't grow up on the Doman method, even by 6 months of age, tiny children have this kind of number sense, right? They can see if quantities are different or the same, for example. So that's why I feel it's such an important ability to strengthen for young children and to continue with children as they get older. Not necessarily with cards, but with poker chips or some other kind of item to strengthen the skill. But yeah, as of right now, I don't know if I perceive quantities differently from anyone else. But my math skills are much stronger than most people. I'm like the person who, the people I work with, if they need to think of something mathematical, they'll be like, oh, Spencer, calculate this for me. Because I'm a bit faster than others in it.
And I think this is really important, because it's not about, I know what people mean by such questions, but it's not really about seeing dots, but about being good at math. And I know lots of students struggle with math at school.
Exactly. Yes.
I know you speak Spanish too. Do you know any other foreign languages?
Yeah, my Italian is quite good. So Italian and Spanish are my two strongest languages. And I would really say that English, Spanish, and Italian are my three languages. I know a bit of Japanese. I was taught it as a kid, but I don't really have many opportunities to use it in life. So I can, get out basic phrases, that kind of thing. And I've learned how to read Hebrew and Russian. But I can't speak it conversationally. I can just read it.
I also speak Italian, so maybe once interview in Italian.
Yeah, well, let's just do the rest of the interview in Italian. I'm sure people will be happy with it.
Okay, is your Spanish and Italian a result of early childhood education, or, for example, reading program? Or maybe you learned it later on?
So Spanish, I learned
Japanese, maybe it was easier?
So I learned, my parents taught us Italian and Japanese. So Italian was one of my early languages, along with Japanese. My parents chose Japanese because they had many people that they worked with who spoke Japanese and could help them with the kind of development of the program, because that's always helpful to have native speakers that you know. And then Spanish I learned as a teenager when I was 14 when I went to Mexico. But there's no question.
With Italian, Spanish, I think is easy because I could understand 80% without learning it.
Exactly. And so I tell people that I can understand like 80% of Portuguese because I understand Spanish and Italian. I can do that.
Yeah, somebody told me also about French. That I've never checked, but French also belongs to this group of languages.
Exactly. And yeah, but there's no question that the more foreign languages someone knows, the easier it is for them to learn another language, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the more open you are to not understanding everything. Because my second language, I was like, I don't understand, and I was blocked. And now I don't speak this language, and somehow I can communicate. I don't know how. In regards to teaching languages at an early age, people have contradictory opinions. Some say a very early start creates a problem because children aren't aware of the idea of many languages and they get mixed up. Oh, this is a long question. We have an example of a 2-year-old boy who was regularly taught reading in Polish and some English on an on and off basis. At present, he speaks his native tongue very fluently for his age, and is very precise when demanding English translation for words and phrases. He seems to have developed a very clear distinction between the two languages. What is the Doman experience in regard to multilingual children? Have you observed this kind of awareness?
Yeah, so this is a topic.
Maybe in yourself as a child, did you feel the difference, I don't know, from an early age between this Japanese and Italian and your parents' language? I know there is a period of mixing up, but...
Yeah. So, just to kind of discuss this, I think that there are a lot of myths around tiny children and foreign languages. That parents are told that are completely untrue. And one of them is about the kind of confusion of tiny children and foreign languages. Like a lot of parents are told their kids will be confused. And I feel that that's a very negative way of describing how children experience languages. So first of all, tiny children, of course, and we don't have to talk about this because it's such a long conversation, but tiny children learn languages much faster than adults. I think everyone knows that. And so unfortunately, because tiny children, when they grow up in environments with multiple languages, very often they'll even combine languages together. They might speak a little bit of English, a little bit of Polish together. So for example, when I was a tiny child, I would say, "Mom, I want to watch the televisione." So I'd instead of saying television, I'd say television in Italian, And so that was just kind of commonplace. in my family. And I think a lot of adults look at that and they're like, oh no, the child is confused, you know, that child is harmed forever. And it's like, well, first of all, kids are very brilliant at cause and effect, right? So they start to figure out, oh, if my parents understand both of these languages, I'll just kind of go in and out between the two languages, no problem. But, you know, and you and I were talking before about how your daughter will like sometimes go to another Polish child and start speaking German, probably because she's like, oh, everyone speaks Polish and German, right? Why not talk? But I'm sure that if you put her for a week with just Polish speaking children and you came back a week later, she would be speaking only Polish to them. She would learn probably quite quickly, you know, these are the rules here. They don't understand when I speak these words, so I'm not going to use them. So children are really brilliant at that. But I think we look at their innocence and say they're confused. They're not confused.
They choose the easiest way, I think. The first word that comes to their mind. That's why I pretended I don't understand any Polish from my daughter until she was 3 years and 3 months. Because then it became a bit challenging. But I just pretend, I ignored Polish completely. I don't understand you. And she had to really struggle. When I
so
saw
you would only respond if she spoke English?
Yeah, only. I ignored it. Now I help her. Because now her vocabulary is, you know, amazing, and it's not possible that she knows that helps her. I think he always helps her.
Yeah.
But when she said, for example, she liked English yesterday instead of Polish wczoraj, but she felt it's not Polish. But when talking to that yesterday. And he gave her the Polish equivalent. And when she said wczoraj to me, I said, what? What are you talking about? Or I completely ignored it, no reaction. But it was possible until the age of 3 and 3 months. And then I stopped. Now I have to help her. But I think it didn't really change anything, but it's more maybe positive now because she feels that she can, that I will help her, but she still communicates in English with me. And after there were 2 days of Polish sentences towards me, not quite recently, and 2 days after she started speaking really good Italian. I don't know, like a crisis, and then Italian, and she wants to speak Italian for hours, and still English and no Polish. So it's okay. Sometimes it works like that, ups and downs. Okay, we have 10 questions left. You've answered 26. Well, from a perspective of a grown-up, do you find there was anything that you feel that you did was unnecessary? Perhaps some programs. Was everything necessary for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so my answer is no, I can't think of anything. But I have to say it's very difficult for me to know what played like the biggest role in my development and what didn't. I think that would even be difficult for my parents to say, let alone for me to say as a child, to have that kind of like self-awareness of connecting the dots of like what's helping me and what's not. So my short answer is no. I actually think doing everything was a positive thing.
Do you continue doing any part of the Doman program? Maybe physical part, maybe, I don't know, maybe you still do crawling or creeping or breathing program or running, I don't know.
Yeah, so I should do more crawling and creeping because it's fantastic, not just for brain development, but for just overall exercise and health. But no, I don't do it. I do running. I do aerobic running. I read, but no, I don't do like the respiratory program or crawling and creeping.
What would you recommend to all adults and elderly people to practice on daily basis?
Good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is aerobic activity, because whenever so by the way, when we talk about exercise, There's aerobic exercise and anaerobic exercise. Anaerobic exercise is exercise where your heart rate goes above a certain amount. And that can be very good, for example, for muscle building. But aerobic exercise, where you're keeping your heart rate within a certain amount, is ideal for oxygen delivery to the brain. So definitely aerobic exercise is a very positive thing. If you can do it daily or close to daily, that's really great. I would say that. I'd say probably nutrition would be number 2, along with physical activity. Watching what we eat.
Yeah, this is one of the questions. Did your family follow a healthy diet? For example, no sugar?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah?
I had very little sugar as a child.
Little, not no sugar, but little.
A little, yeah. It wasn't like we never had any. At special events, maybe even on a weekend, there was a treat. But on like a weekday, absolutely not. There was, and there were many foods that I just grew up as a child knowing, like, oh, in this family we don't eat those things. Like soda, for example, we never had soda. So there were just certain things that I knew I could see that it was a difference between me and others. And then also we really didn't have dairy in my home. So we had, non-dairy milks, for example.
And did all the family follow this? Or just because, for example, in our case, my husband lives on McDonald's and so on, and me and my daughters follow healthy diet.
I would recommend.
I wasn't even asked about it. And I said that it's unhealthy food because he's addicted to it. That was my explanation.
Well, I was speaking with someone recently about tiny children being picky eaters. When I say picky, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They don't want to eat everything. They just said
exactly. So one of the interesting things, if you look at the history of writing, before the year 1940, no one ever wrote in all of the writing that exists that children are picky eaters. So in fact, when people talked about children and their eating habits, it was usually the opposite, where they'd say, oh, children, will eat anything. Adults have more refined taste, but children eat everything, And so it seems like this idea of children having very limited diets is actually a modern issue it's an issue of the modern world. And I think there are many reasons for this. I'm sure food marketing toward children is an issue. I think parents also are often reluctant to be strong with their children and be like, no, you're eating what's on your plate.
Yeah,
but I think also sugar consumption is a big part of this. Tiny kids who grow up with sugary and salty diets. It does change the way they taste foods. And so as a kid, I never remember telling my parents, no, I won't eat it. It was just like, what you're given, you eat, you eat.
It's not only about being strong with your kids, but about all your family.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, it's true. Because if dad's eating McDonald's, it's a little bit more.
That is okay because he won't give anything like that to my daughters, and he really does it when they don't see, or
Yeah.
But grandparents, and I have to threaten them. If I learn about some sugar or something, I will never see you again. Something like that. I'm like that, and my eyes never eaten anything with sugar.
My grandfather always used to say, to parents, he would say that grandparents are either the greatest blessing or the worst. And he said, I'm a grandfather, but it's the truth. And unfortunately, when it comes to nutrition, grandparents are usually one of parents' biggest enemies.
Yeah. Are you trying to follow any particular diet now?
Okay, so essentially yes. So I by and large eat a gluten-free diet. It's something that I started in 2013 because I read a book by a tennis player, Novak Djokovic. He wrote a book called Serve to Win, where he talks about the diet that he eats. And so I followed the recommendations in the book, and it made a big difference for me. I lost a lot of weight. I was dealing with some knee pain. It went away. I have a lot more energy. So, when I'm at my best, I'm following a gluten-free, sugar-free diet, but I have to admit, I do break the rules. But that's my kind of like ideal situation, is gluten-free, sugar-free. My wife has also gotten me into vegan weekdays, so we only eat like meat products on weekends now. But that's not just a health thing; it's an environmental thing, and something new that we're trying.
Oh, okay. Were you or any of your siblings on elimination diet back then, when there wasn't enough information maybe to have a diet as a part of the program? I know you didn't have dairy products and sugar, and so what else? Was there any elimination diets there then in the past?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would consider we're dairy-free, sugar-free, so I would definitely consider that a elimination diet. We, because I was growing up in the early 90s, we didn't quite understand that at that point that gluten could be problematic for some children. Otherwise, my parents might have eliminated gluten. But as far as I remember, it was really no sugar, no dairy, no kind of like artificial sweeteners or artificial colorings. Those were kind of the biggest rules.
Okay. Oh, now let's go back to sport. What's your opinion about sport? We know what Glenna Domana suggested for a newborn and for example, 4-year-old kid. What about a regular, more serious sport? Do you recommend starting at the age of 5? And if yes, which sport is worth considering?
So I'm a big believer in sports. I still play recreational sports. I play on 3 different sports. It's also my way of staying active and getting together with other people. So I play American football. I play 2 Irish sports called hurling and Gaelic football. And my wife plays all 3 sports as well. So, but I actually think from a child's standpoint, I don't recommend a specific sport for kids. I think actually parents should introduce their child to different sports and allow their children to choose what's best for them. I really don't believe in parents making decisions for children and kind of locking their children into those decisions. So for example, saying, my child is going to, play soccer and that's it. By the way, I think a lot of parents find this surprising. They've done research with sports players. And for example, in American football, which is the most popular sport in the United States, the average age of a child starting that sport was 14 for the professionals. And so, but when they looked at those children, what they noticed was that they were playing many sports. They were playing baseball, they were playing soccer, they were playing gymnastics or whatever. And that basically when children do a lot of sports, they become very accomplished athletes. And then as they get older, they start to really realize what their passion is. And then they decide what they want to do. So I would recommend parents take that approach. Give your children a lot of sports experiences. And then let your child decide what they love.
Does the same refer, for example, to choosing a musical instrument? Should children be exposed to all sorts of instruments and then we can...
Yeah, the problem with that is that instruments are very expensive. So the funny thing is, if I were a parent, I would, interestingly, I would probably look at the resources around me and maybe choose an instrument based on if there's a really good teacher in the area. Because teaching a musical instrument for a parent with no musical experience is incredibly difficult. It's basically impossible. You need to have someone who knows how to teach an instrument. And so my parents picked Suzuki violin because we had Suzuki violin teachers in our area. But no, I think for musical instruments, I don't think you can just switch, anytime the child, decides, oh, this is kind of difficult. In fact, I think it's actually a good thing to use to teach a child that, okay, there are some things in life you've got to stick with. And,
you can always chop different kinds of beats and maybe just
Yeah, exactly. Like you can allow your child to listen to the different instruments in a listening program, expose them to different instruments. But yeah, once you spend all the money, that's the decision is made.
If you had to choose one single program which is the most beneficial for all well children, what would you recommend? Because some parents can't do everything.
Yeah, I definitely picked the reading program. Like I don't even have to think about it. And then probably after the reading program, I would pick encyclopedic knowledge because it's just so much fun. And I think it gives a really fun introduction to learning for kids. But I would definitely say reading first.
You help parents to maximize the potential of their kids. Supposing you had your own kids, would you do all Doman programs with them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't even have to think about it.
It's
like a way of life. The program really should not feel like a diet. You know what I mean? Like it shouldn't feel like, oh, we have to do this. If it feels like that, it means that,
it should be part of your life. Yeah, like my diet is part of my life. I can't imagine, eating McDonald's.
Correct. That's right. So it should really be like a lifestyle. And if it doesn't feel that way, if it doesn't feel like it's kind of a natural part of your family's life, then maybe you have to kind of reevaluate. Maybe you're doing too much. Maybe you've got to scale back a little bit. Maybe you just have to pick one thing and do it consistently. But it should feel like, we're a Doman family and this is what we do.
Last question of these, and maybe we'll have some time for 3 more. This is quite challenging, I think. If you, with all your knowledge and experience, could become a baby again, what would you change or add to early Doman methods development?
Oh, wow. What a fantastic question. You've got some very creative readers, Aga. Wow, you've gotten me with that one, and I feel like I should have an answer to this because I obviously we've made discoveries in the last years that we didn't know before, but I'm trying to think of something that was like clearly lacking from my childhood. I can't think of anything, but I'll tell you what. Let's go on to the next questions, and if the idea comes to me, I'll tell you.
Okay, these other ones I just left them out because they are not about really your experience, but I was asked to ask them. What is the key thing in the Doman method when it comes to kids with Down syndrome?
What's the key thing?
Yeah, the key thing. The key thing.
Well, yeah. So the issue.
Should we treat them in any? Should we treat them differently, maybe from other brain injured kids? I don't know. What is the most important thing? The key thing.
Yeah. So to be honest, the key thing is to do as much of the program as possible, and that's just because while children with Down syndrome have a genetic condition, while their genetics may not be normal, it's actually their neurological development which creates most of the difficulties that they have in their lives. And so the good news is we can address the neurological issues that they have. But for a child with Down syndrome, you really should do an entire program. So the child needs a nutrition program. They need a physical program, a cognitive program. They need the respiratory program, which is called Doman method oxygenation. So definitely for that family, I would recommend the online Doman method course. I think it's absolutely essential for any parent out there with a child with developmental issues. But yeah, I think their child needs a bit of everything.
Is patterning safe in case of kids with cerebral palsy and epilepsy? Can patterning cause an attack?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Patterning is extremely safe. It's been used for 60 years with tens of thousands of children. It's a highly safe program. There's no side effects that I can think of. Yeah, it's one of our oldest and safest programs.
Is there any sense to do it with one person if it's not possible to do it with three?
Look, I think you could do patterning with two people and the quality wouldn't be that good, but you could do it with two people. You can't do patterning with one person because it requires, you need at least two people to work on the two sides of the body. It's an activity that requires stimulating the two hemispheres of the brain. And so you need at least one person on both sides of the body. So no, you can't do it with one person.
Yeah, I know somebody who did after Jordan's recommendation, just, a mom and a husband, just two of them, and it helped. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and how can we stimulate eyesight, which is physically okay, but this is still about this child with cerebral palsy and epilepsy. So the eyesight is physically okay, but they don't know how much a child sees because there are some holes in the white matter.
Yeah.
I have it in Polish.
I mean, so what I would do, I would definitely do light reflex stimulation for this child. And by the way, if parents want more information, they can go to the book, How Smart Is Your Baby? Because it talks about visual stimulation for babies, but it can also be used for children with visual problems. And so it describes light reflex stimulation in that book. And also it also describes using black and white and color images, which honestly, it depends on how poor the child's vision is. But definitely for this kid, I'd recommend light reflex stimulation. And also for the parents to consider taking the online course in the future.
Light reflex is this first stimulation. It is described in this very first
That's
book.
correct. It's using a flashlight to stimulate the pupil reflex to light. It's our most basic visual ability that we have.
Okay, and the last question from me, if I can.
Actually, before you give me your last question, can I go back and answer the question?
Yes, I have the baby thing, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just because it comes to mind. It's actually not so much for me as a baby, but more for other children. I think that one thing that a lot of parents don't realize is that challenge is very important for children. Children need to be challenged. There's this concept with adults that children are kind of fragile creatures that need to constantly be protected. And children in many ways are actually the opposite of fragile. They're kind of anti-fragile in the sense that, like the immune system is something where if it's challenged, it gets stronger. And children are very much similar. Now, of course, I'm not talking about things like trauma. Of course, we need to protect children from things that are dangerous or traumatic. But I think a lot of the time, parents are like constantly worried about their children. It's like this, we need to protect them from the terrible, dangerous world. And kids are actually natural survivors. And there's a lot of research now which is showing, I don't know if it's like this in Poland, but in the US, it's clear. Children's anxiety rates are exploding. Children are more anxious than ever before in history. And it's like, why? We live in a safer, richer world than we've lived in the past. Why are children so anxious all the time? Why do they have more anxiety disorders? Why are they more medicated? And it seems like one reason is because many parents feel that it's kind of their job to not let their children become anxious. So for example, if you're a parent and you're walking down the street with your child and a dog comes and your child is scared of dogs, many parents will pick up their child and walk across the street because the child is scared. In many ways, that's the worst thing that you can do, because the child learns dogs are scary and they must be dangerous because mom is taking me across the street. Okay, so you're reaffirming the anxiety of the child. And so children kind of start to learn to walk through life learning that's dangerous, that's dangerous, that's dangerous because mom and dad are protecting me. So you actually, as parents, it's very important to kind of give your child very light exposure to things. Now, of course, I'm not talking about throwing your child in a pool if they're scared to swim, but you have to give your child a little bit of that social challenge to kind of build that muscle in them to continue to face challenges. Or else, unfortunately, kids get very, very anxious whenever they're challenged. So I think that's something which a lot of parents, even Doman parents, don't understand. And I think that this is a problem that the media makes worse. For example, many parents are kind of told by the media all the time, the world is dangerous. There are terrible people out there hurting children, for example. And of course, there are sick, terrible people who hurt kids. But actually, when you look at the statistics, it doesn't really matter if you live in the most dangerous city in the world or out in the most beautiful countryside. Crime toward children is basically the same no matter where you are. And it's because even in a dangerous city, people, it takes only a super sick person to hurt a child. And so what I'm basically saying to parents is I think that because parents are so scared of the world sometimes that they limit their child's exposure. They don't allow their child to run outside and play because they're constantly afraid. And the truth is, children, the vast majority of the time, are very, very safe. So I guess that's something I don't talk about a lot, but I think is really important.
Yeah, I guess that this is quite unusual for you, all the questions here. And for one from me, because now my baby is 5 months old, and I'm really crazy about this crawling and creeping thing. What is the average age when a child starts really crawling? Because I know that they started birth, but somebody told me that maybe it's a bit unconscious because she moved. I even sent Jordan video, and she moved on this inclined crawling track.
Yes.
And in her sleep, even when it was flat, but since she started holding her head, she stopped completely, and she just there are some episodes, but. Well, most of the time she doesn't move even 1 centimeter when she's on a flat surface. Somebody advised me to use a wooden board. We have a kind of a wooden toy for kids, and I use this board, and it's inclined, and this is a slide, and she moves on it. But on flat surface, although she's 5 months old, it's like legs up, hands up, it's like flying. It needs to be a little bit inclined. Even a blanket, it's on a blanket which is on the grass on a little hill, it's better than flat floor. And I don't know, because in Poland, there is somebody who modified the Doman method, and I won't mention her name, but some people know who I'm talking about, and she does exactly the same. She has the same profile, but she claims it's hers, and so on and so forth. And in the Doman profile, the age of cross pattern crawling is 2 months. you know?
Correct.
And she said some things like that, if your child doesn't creep and doesn't crawl at the age of 2 months, it means almost brain injury and so on and so forth. And my baby is, yes, and if you are interested how to do something about it, just join my course, something like that. Really.
So that's very.
A lot of people, a lot of parents, because I'm asking on my behalf, but on behalf of other parents, because a lot of them are writing to me and asking, I read this there and there, and my child is already 7, for example, and they still don't cross pattern. And I'm really, I don't know, because, you know, on the profile, maybe there's a possibility, it doesn't mean anything. But, you know, my baby, she's 5 months old, and when she's put on the floor, she doesn't really move. She moved on a blanket on the sofa, for example, a little bit, but then she stopped. But, well, since she seems to be focusing more on her head and on moving.
Yes. So, okay, so a few things, because you've touched on some very important things. So first of all, many children, will even sometimes skip crawling and go directly to creeping. So, for example, I had one nephew who, even though he was given a lot of floor opportunities, he actually really never crawled on the flat floor. He went directly to creeping. And sometimes the bigger the baby, also, the harder it is for them to crawl. So the heavier they are, it's harder. And I know that many parents look at the developmental profile and they see the age of crawling is 2.5 months. But to be honest, it's very typical for children, even if they do crawl, to learn how to crawl at 4 or 5, months or even after. So by the way, I would never honestly, so I didn't put my phone on silent. But what I was saying is that for me, in terms of mobility development and concern, if a child is not creeping on their hands and knees, maybe by 10 months, then I would start to get concerned about their mobility development. And by the way, that's kind of what the research says as well. On our profile, it says creeping is around 7 months of age. And I would say for our children, that's pretty typical. But I would get concerned if a child's not creeping at about 9 or 10 months. But crawling, as I said, it's actually very commonly kind of skipped ability. I mean, for your daughter, just listening to what you're saying, I would be doing a lot of opportunities on an inclined surface. I would definitely be doing like 10
and we started doing patterning as well with my husband.
Oh, okay.
And the 4-year-old, not so often, because she's not always, she doesn't always want or something, but
Yes. So yeah, I would do, patterning is great. If
it's not perfect, because I attended once, also, I told you about training session with somebody, and Maya was a model for patterning, and my daughter, and I also was asked to do this, but I was moved away. You can't synchronize, do it, because I didn't creep and crawl. I was a child like that because I was closed in this cot, and I couldn't do that. So maybe I just can't synchronize off. I really need to focus. So I know it's not perfect, but maybe, so nothing to worry that she doesn't do it.
Nothing to worry about, but definitely a lot of opportunities on the inclined floor, and maybe just looking at the surface as well of the floor. Sometimes getting like a very smooth mat that you can put down on the ground, which is maybe just a little bit soft. There are these kind of like baby mats that are they're not very soft, but they're just slightly soft, but they're smooth. And so it makes it easier for the child to crawl.
So it's better, mats are better than just hard floor.
Yeah, for a lot of kids, they seem to be more willing to move on the mat. I'm not sure if it's
I noticed, on completely flat sofa, but on a blanket. It's when she wants, not very often, when she wants, she can move.
Yeah.
And my older daughter started crawling.
Oh.
I think she was 8 months old when she started crawling, but she did it for a long, long time, for months.
Okay. And so that's interesting. So she started crawling at 8 months, and then when did she start creeping?
Creeping, when she was almost 13 months, something like that, and just 2 weeks of creeping, and she started making her first steps. Yeah, but I wasn't aware, of the physical development of anything. Just I knew only about cards, reading and math, and that's all. I learned about all the other things later, so it just happened. And now I'm doing everything, crawling track and everything. And she said her first word, the first conscious word, so maybe.
By and large, if a child, like in her circumstance, where she crawled from maybe 8 months to 13 months and then started creeping, my guess is she needed that for whatever reason. Maybe her mobility development was a bit delayed, but she needed to do those activities for that period of time, and probably that was very positive for her from a neurological standpoint. Now, why that was the case, each kid is different. Sometimes for certain children, birth is a traumatic experience, and sometimes children will have, lack of oxygen supply. It's very common for children to be born, a little blue.
The older one had some situations. She was even, they even suspected Down syndrome because she has these lines, but just lines.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I'm just saying, if she did those things at a later age and for longer periods, she probably needed to do that.
And she started again when she was almost 3. Because I tried to, after this training session, because it turned out that it's not cross pattern, and I tried to encourage her when she was 2.5, and I promised her like homemade ice cream, sugar-free of course, and something, but it didn't work. And then she suddenly, a few months later, she suddenly remembered, and she asked for ice cream, and she did. She did several sessions daily for a week, and then after a week it was cross pattern. Maybe not really synchronized, because I sent video to Jordan, but I don't know. It just happened before her 3rd birthday.
Wow.
So I should, okay, now I know that I don't have to be worried or anything. Because,
no, absolutely not.
And by the way, this wooden board, like a slide, is better for moving down than crawling track. This is the one that we have, because it's not very slippery, the track. But
exactly.
She just does any movement and she goes down, but it's shorter.
Yeah, and so that's why, for example, with children who are brain injured, we use something called an incline floor, which is a very smooth surface. But for many babies, parents are hesitant to use that kind of surface because the baby's neck control is not perfect, and sometimes the child might hit their
I used it the first time when she couldn't hold her head and she hit her nose, so I stopped. But now she's quite confident, so yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Because this was the last question. It was a real pleasure. After a year, almost, it's been a year. Exactly, almost exactly. Because we had webinar at the end of August. This was the last chance before me going on sick leave. I remember, so yeah.
Well, it's been a crazy year.
Really crazy, but I think your answers will be really useful to all parents. So I hope you've managed to record it, and then you will send me the recording so I can publish it, and maybe you can share it, and I will share it, of course, everywhere. And
absolutely, I'll do that.
Yeah, it's really, thank you also for answering my private question, because this is
of course
on my mind.
Fun.
So good night. I don't know,
right.
day or night for you.
It's getting to the evening here, but I know it's later night for you. So thanks everyone for
quite late, almost midnight. So thank you, and see you maybe next time. We'll see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.